Uma casa de família pode ser utilizada por várias pessoas. Por exemplo, a filha que pratica desporto e deixa o saco de equipamento no hall de entrada, mais ou menos a minha filha. O filho que adora lanchar no sofá e espalha migalhas pelo chão, o meu filho. E vários adultos que, entre diferentes hábitos, também fazem das suas. Deixam moedas por todo lado, nunca sabem do carregador do telemóvel ou teimam em escrever listinhas para não se esquecerem de nada. Isto sou mais eu. Existem depois também famílias mais numerosas, com meios-irmãos a passar o fim de semana ou avós a matar saudades. A questão é que uma casa de família é um sítio comum onde diferentes personalidades coabitam com necessidades e mais-valias. Para que tudo flua, devem ser implementadas regras e promover o respeito mútuo. Só assim pode surgir a boa convivência e as boas parcerias. Ou nesta analogia, só assim é que o jantar de família corre bem. Um aeroporto não é diferente desta casa. Nele cruzam-se passageiros, cruzam-se trabalhadores, mercadoria, bagagem, equipas técnicas, logística, serviços, companhias aéreas fixas, companhias low cost, voos ocasionais e até voos privados e ou militares. É nesta gigantesca casa que várias empresas e entidades operam e convivem, sendo as regras e o respeito absolutamente essenciais para que os bons resultados aconteçam. E de que forma podem as companhias aéreas usufruir da relação com o espaço físico e onde fixam balcões, escritórios e aeronaves? E de que forma podem os aeroportos motivar estas ligações com o objetivo de oferecer melhores serviços aos passageiros? O foco da próxima conferência tem a ver com as sinergias entre aeroportos e companhias aéreas. E a moderação está a cargo de Hugo Espírito Santo, da McKinsey. Olá, Hugo. Boa conversa.
Muito obrigado. And I'll switch to English for the sake of my guests today. I'll call to the stage Thierry Ligonnière, the CEO of ANA, and Rafael Schvartzman, the Regional Vice President of IATA. So you choose. Hugo. So I have to tell you that when I was invited to host this, I was a little bit, I was feeling that the organization didn't really like me. Because in recent weeks there has been some harsh topics being discussed among airlines and airports. But today the focus is different. We want to focus on the things that we as an industry can do together. And so we want to focus on a constructive debate on the future and on cooperation, okay? And I think, in many ways, COVID was a great reset button for everything, right? And I think also for this one could be a great reset button. I see 4 areas that I would like to cover in these next few minutes. One is sustainability, right? You both talked about this when you spoke before. It is an imperative, but it's also something where we as an industry need to cooperate and understand, and also make the public understand, right? There has to be a fair system for us to move and become stronger with sustainability. I think the second one is around the passenger, right? Which is, in the end of the day, our ultimate purpose. And we see passengers changing their behaviors, right? We see everyone has changed their behaviors. And so what can we do, right? What should we do as an industry, and how can we cooperate to get a better, seamless journey? The third one is around the operations, right? And again, we were being described in Portuguese as a house, and the house has operations, right? And in this house, the operations depend on data. So what else can we do? And then the last point is around the recovery, right? Because we all depend on a swift recovery, so what can we do? And so I think those would be the 4 main areas that I would like to discuss with you. And I would start straight with you, Thierry, and ask you, you talked about your plans on decentralized generation, self-consumption, electric vehicles. How can airlines help in this endeavor of being more sustainable at ANA? Right?
Yeah, well, first, all of this is a common goal, because that's the acceptability of our business, the aviation business, and our capacity to grow in the future, to create value for the populations, value for the countries we work in. We're a fantastic trigger of value creation in countries like Portugal, which depends a lot on accessibility. So in order to make our business legitimate and acceptable, we have to show that we have an active action towards environmental performance. And that is something that we do all together. There is nothing we can do in aviation alone. Most of the issue today has to do with the climate change, obviously. And everyone has to do a little bit of its path towards reduction of CO2 emissions. In the aviation, obviously there is emissions at the level of airports, but 99% of the emissions are related to aircraft. We do our part of that, but the aircraft emissions are also an issue of the airports. We also can contribute to that. By joining forces, by defining common goals. This is what we have been doing here in Portugal. We have joined stakeholders. Applying for airport carbon accreditation level 4, that's the highest, and level 4 plus maybe next year, means that you join forces with other stakeholders, that you deal with scope 3. And that's what we've been doing. We have an excellent response from our airline partners. We are all together in that, and we define an action plan for all of us. So we will maybe talk about sharing data and so on. Sharing data, defining KPIs, sharing data about environmental performance is also the way to move forward with environmental performance.
And how, and perhaps to you, Rafael, and how do you see this, right? Because I think while we are also we have, IATA announced the commitment of net zero 2050, which is a very ambitious commitment. That will depend a lot on airports, but also on other stakeholders, right? Because this is not something you do alone. How do you see this path towards this ambitious goal?
Well, definitely, as you said, the industry came together and announced this net zero by 2050. And here I want to just highlight that because it is a major step, because this is a global one, right? Obviously, we know that at EU level, the aspirations were already there, the mandates were already there, but this is a global business. So we need to work and think globally if we're going to tackle this. That's the first thing I would like to highlight. Very importantly, also, I think as Thierry mentioned, the collaborative is key in the whole value chain. Now, in the case of airports and airlines, there are many things we can do together, but there are other players here that we need support for, because obviously this is a very challenging environment decarbonizing a flying aircraft, it's much more complex than decarbonizing a car, right? And the options, etc. So one of them is obviously the accessibility to sustainable aviation fuels, for example, right? And how do we get to that? What type of incentive, research and development? And obviously, the airports will need to put together the infrastructure to be able to have the access, right? So that's a critical element. And if we don't have sufficient access to sustainable aviation fuels, there is no technology that can be quick enough to replace the alternative of flying with the current engines, right? And I mentioned that because there is also this belief that we're just going to have quickly alternatives of aircrafts, right? Type of aircrafts. And according to the research today, basically until the mid-20s, 30s, let's say, it's when we're going to potentially see an acceleration of the technology, but nothing before that, meaning we're going to still have, let's say, the technology that we have today operating, therefore we need that fuel, right? We'll need it longer. We need it, obviously, until 2050 to be able to replace. So it's very important, the incentive for production and obviously the coordination with the airport. I think in terms of the technology being implemented at the aircraft, obviously airlines are modernizing. That's a major element, but that's also to the benefit of us. It's not airport related, as I said before. There is also, I would say, the part of the carbon capture, which has to be obviously, sustainable carbon capture. I would say, if it not credible ones, right? So I think that's one of the industry's key elements. I think the other thing we need to realize, and this is for airports and for us critical, is the modernization of certain areas like the airspace, right? Because here in Lisbon, before in 2019, congestion was a major problem, airspace congestion was a major problem, and I think that's something we can do today. So I think I would say that's an area that we also will both benefit extremely, and obviously in that sense, I would say the sharing of that technology plus the data that it will help airports and airlines being able to plan more effectively. Again, all of these are technologies we have today. There are others that will come later, like probably, obviously, the more revolutionary, potentially hydrogen aircrafts, etc. But I think these are key areas.
So let me follow that, because one of the major issues, and we see these recurringly, is the planning of the infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
Because airlines tend to operate very fast, right? Everything is fast, and the airports, on the other hand, it's an infrastructure, right? So how is IATA thinking about this pathway of the different fuels, right? Because we'll see most likely electric aircraft for smaller destinations. We perhaps will see hydrogen, but it's still out in the open. So how do you think about this, the communication and the interlink with the infrastructure player?
I think this is an important question, because we tend to think, obviously related to an aircraft only. I think today the discussion at the European level is leveraging the infrastructure we have to use it rightly, right? And that includes, I would bring in something else, which is intermodal transport, right? But we have to be very careful when we do that, because we tend to think that, let's say by bringing in a train, then you are already saving CO2. Europe has a plan to build 10,000 kilometers of high-speed rail, which will cost 250 billion euros to build, and between 18 to 28 years to do. And I said by mid-2030, we already have the new technology. So all of those discussions need to happen now, because it takes a lot of time to build it. And I'm sure for Thierry as well, where putting up an infrastructure, we need to have some predictability. Where are we going to be going? Where are we going to be going? How can we leverage the current technology? And how can we take advantage of the different efficiencies? I brought in intermodality because I think it's a great opportunity. Definitely Europe being one of the best connected regions in terms of train service in the world compared to other regions, but still not a very easy solution to implement in time, right?
And I think the issue of the profile, the emission profile of transport is first of all very different here in Portugal. The bulk comes from road transportation, heavy road transportation, and so it's not a very obvious and well-known reality. You mentioned in your intervention, you focus a lot about the fairness, right? The fairness of this transition, the fairness with other sectors, right? And how do you see this, right? How do you see the environmental charges that are being discussed by the European Union? What's your perspective there? What can we as an industry do?
Yeah, well, I think we have observed, the creation of an environmental taxation in several countries. What's important, even if it's legitimate for someone to compensate its own contribution in terms of CO2 production and through a specific charge, or noise or whatsoever, we can understand that. The issue is that the resources, the economic resources that are created through these charges remain in the sector. That's very important, because the sector needs money in order to be able to innovate. The developments that we're discussing, the H2 technologies, SAFs and everything, this needs money, this needs resources. If we want the sector to be able to invest and to move forward into this environmental transition, it is paramount that we have the resources to do that. And if there is a taxation that that goes and gets resources from whoever creates those emissions, it has to be kept in the sector for innovation and for the compensation of the impact that we ourselves create. It cannot be used in other kind of sectors. It has to be dedicated to aviation in order to help us move forward.
Maybe, Hugo, if I may add, because it's a very important topic since we are in Portugal. Actually, I mentioned it before in my message. I mean, the example you have it here, I mean, the tax that you are having in Portugal, if we calculate the equivalent in 2019 numbers, it was about 50 million euros, right, on taxes that don't go to sustainability, right? So, and we need to be able to decarbonize this industry. You need to invest in research and development heavily. So the investment has to go to this type of, to the technology that will bring us there. But if we tax aviation, we're just not going to get there. We're going to take the resources away, yeah? And it's going to even, on the other side, passengers are going to pay more. And Portugal is a tourist destination. So obviously, you're competing with other regions in that sense. So I think it has multiple angles to look at, but definitely taxation and not dedicated to specifically sustainability of the industry is wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I do think that the transition, the fair transition, right, is a very important dimension, especially for us, right? Otherwise, as an industry, we'll be challenged. You were talking before about data sharing, right? Which I think, again, one of the things that has happened in these very crazy last 2 years is an acceleration of everything, which is the digital element to this, right? So, the industry is in many ways curious, right? We are very advanced in certain areas, but in others we are extremely manual and very traditional, right? How do you see these, right? What can you do to really improve operations, right? What is the role of data sharing? What is the role of data in general to make this happen in an airport?
Yeah, well, data is absolutely paramount to be able to operate with efficiency the airport infrastructures. We will be facing in Portugal, in Lisbon, in 2023, again a capacity crunch. And in order to overcome that or to alleviate the situation, when the infrastructure, the capacity is not ready yet, the only way is to operate in a more efficient way. And the only way to operate in a more efficient way is through data sharing. We already have a lot of data. We already share a lot of data. We can move a little bit forward with data sharing between airlines, between airspace navigation, in order to be able to analyze, to have common KPIs and see where are the difficulties in our operation. Sharing those data is difficult because obviously it shows where the weak points are. But we have to be ready to do that. We have to be transparent, and we have to be willing to get better.
And what are the challenges to do that, right? So I think you pointed one, which is showing up the inefficiencies, right? If you want of a specific stakeholder, what other challenges do you see for these to really accelerate? Because we do have some experience, right? But it's still a little bits and pieces, right?
I think the only challenge is trust. Technological challenge is not a challenge. We already have the solutions. Trust is an issue because it exposes the weaknesses of the different stakeholders. And I'm happy to see that we are moving forwards. Christine from TAP was here on this stage, and we're working out an agreement with TAP to share this data because TAP works in a hub. We are the hub airport of TAP, And data sharing, operational data sharing is absolutely fundamental for the competitiveness of the hub. So we are now moving forward. We are facing the issues very openly, and I think that the crisis that we have been going through helps us, being aligned on that. All the difficulties that we may have had before now are to be overcome. This is the past, and now we have to focus on how we get better collectively. That's the issue.
And what about the others, right, Rafael? Because we have airlines and airports, but there are many others in this ecosystem. How is IATA thinking about this, right? How can we really push into a real data, a real data sharing across the ecosystem and not only between these 2 points of this?
Yeah, well, obviously, Thierry highlighted the benefits of sharing data, and you correctly highlighted that the ecosystem is a bit bigger than just us. Obviously, that's very important, and actually during this pandemic that has been clear, where one of the things that when we talk about, I guess, data sharing, it is important to drive data sharing and have standards. One of the things we saw during the pandemic is the loss of standards, right? Basically, everyone in a fragmented way implemented things, even different technologies, et cetera, right? So in that sense, the EU Digital COVID Certificate is a great initiative, right? It's actually the one that has more success in the world, in spite of necessarily not being the greatest solution, because the actual implementation of it, the locally has been different in every country, but still, it's a good solution. Now, when we're talking about data sharing, we need to globally and wider, we need to agree and we need to have common standards, right? Which today, again, on the COVID has proven that we are fragmented in that approach. Before we were not able to share well. Now with the fragmentation that came out with COVID, so that's a critical one. So, and then I guess the common objective here should be to digitalize the experience, being from operational sense, but also from the passenger experience side, right? Because that is going to help us actually drive the efficiencies that we need in a secure way, which is what it's important here, right? We need to maintain the security, which has been quite successful, but we need that common standard to bring back the common standard. We have that initiative for the EU DCC, which is a great one. IATA has the IATA travel pass as well. And there's also initiatives that we're working on, the One ID, which is basically you will be able to travel with your digital ID anywhere in the world. And that will simplify the work of an airport or an airline in terms of checking processes being slowed down, et cetera. So again, digitalizing and using the data to be able to digitalize in a standardized way is the way to go. That's the only way to go if we want to actually be able to not only go back to 2019, if we can say numbers, but actually to be able to do it sustainably, which is the key question here, because we're talking about not just bring it back what we had before, but actually bring it in a sustainable manner. And I think digitalization is one of the key elements here.
But let me provoke you on that. Is that enough, right? Because I think, let's face it, the travel experience for the passenger was, was already becoming very intense. I'll call it intense. Now there is travel anxiety. Now there are rules that change. Specific country rule, even within Europe, right? We fly to Madrid, we fly to Paris. It's what can we do, right? Because in the end of the day, we also owe to the passengers to improve their experience. So, what else should we be doing?
When I mentioned digitalization, one of the things I noticed by traveling, and again, not being able to travel similar to 2019, but I have been traveling, is you see now efforts being made to communicate more proactively and effectively within the different stakeholders, including the passenger. Because today, as a passenger, you correctly said, everybody has such a high level of uncertainty because in every country you don't know. I mean, when I landed 2 weeks ago in Paris, I need to fill a paper like this big, right? You were there probably, yeah? And coming here, a different one. Now the question is, where do these papers go, right? I mean, because, you know, it's a question, where does the paper go, right? And can we do it differently so it will be the same and similar experience to all passengers can get. So I think we need to bring back the standardization of the data, the standardization of the way we, you know, this is something we had confusion, but we did have standards, right? Overall to travel worldwide, you know, more or less. Today you don't know what the requirements will be. So I think, again, a very important element is to use these initiatives. Could be the EU DCC, IATA Travel Pass, as I said, is one option where you will be able to travel and get all your ID plus test plus, you know, I'm not trying to advertise because this is not what IATA, it was built to bring a solution to a very fragmented and critical stage. And the One ID, which is an initiative that we are working together. But again, using digitalization to improve the passenger experience is key. I think this is where we have to focus. The airports can also bring the technology. I mean, we have the technology actually today, that can be installed. So I think, again, these initiatives are there, but we're still seeing fragmented decision making, maybe lack of political commitment, right? In that sense, at a global level, because aviation is global. Remember, this is not a local thing, right?
And for an airport, right, what are the, you have quality of service, right? And you are, in many ways, you suffer a lot, right? Because you are the first point of contact and the last point of contact in the travel experience. So how are you thinking about the new travel experience, right? The post-pandemic travel experience?
Yeah. First, you have to distinguish two things, the hardware and the software, let's say like this. The hardware is about capacity, because it's difficult to ensure good quality of service when you don't have space, when you don't have capacity. And it's here in Lisbon, which has suffered from capacity problems in the past. We have been very happy to see that we had the price of the best airport in Europe in 2020, when the pressure of traffic was lower. That means that when we have no capacity issues, our services are great. So we have to solve the hardware. Once the hardware is dealt with, we have to deal with the software. And the software is about the passenger experience. I fully agree with Rafael. I think that what passengers don't like is unexpected things, is uncertainty about their travel times, the different steps they have to go through in the airport that might be stressful. And we have to help to solve that through technology. We have to solve that through standardization. We have to make sure that everything they go through is expected in terms of process. And we have to keep the surprising part for the rest of the experience. We like, to welcome passengers in the airport with a specific experience, with what we call the sense of place, yeah, which reflects basically a territory and a place into the experience offer of the airport. We have to surprise the passenger with entertainment, with commercial offers, with the kind of information we give to him. We cannot surprise him with unexpected waiting times or difficulties throughout his process, from the entry door of the airport until the entry door of the aircraft.
And things like the biometric usage for the screening, 3D screening of luggage, is this something to be real soon, or given that we all suffered financially, it's hard to make the investments needed for this to occur?
We are actively working on it. I think this will be the next step for all of us, because that's the way we solve these processing issues with technology. It's by having a capacity to recognize the passenger, with a biometric token, which is basically, which can be the face or other kinds of tokens. But biometrics is on the way. We have been making some pilot in Lisbon, in Terminal 1 with TAP. We're going to do that. Everybody's very enthusiastic with the deployment of this technology, and us at the first place, we're very enthusiastic about that because it will make the experience better and it will make our processes easier.
And it will allow more time for a passenger in the airport, and so more retail spending, and, which is also good.
And having a nice experience.
Which is also good.
Yeah.
Also good. I see the numbers blinking in yellow, so one final question for both of you. Both talk about recovery, right? And we know, even if you want, this is not going to be a straight line. That's I think that's the only thing we can assume now. How can airlines and airports cooperate to really, smoothen what is going to be a very volatile and uncertain ride, right? Because in the end of the day, there will be outbreaks, there will be, moments where the pandemic goes again a little bit out of control. So how do we work together to make this happen and we ensure recovery all the way?
Yeah, I think actually before the panel we were talking a little bit, and when you were posing the question, I was thinking Thierry mentioned the one important element, and again, we're not just talking about Portugal here in general because we're talking about airports and airlines. It's the collaborative decision-making process. I think that has to be implemented everywhere in the world, which is not the case, right? We're talking about the initiatives here in Lisbon in that regard, which is a good example. I think these are the areas that we can touch and do today effectively for this recovery, because there are areas that we discussed today that are, let's say, outside of the airline by itself, right? It goes beyond governments and other institutions that need to be involved. I think also probably we need to look at, and again, this is not just, I would say, airports and airlines, very important thing, thinking in Europe in particular, and obviously Lisbon is I'm very concerned about the airspace management, to be very honest. This has been a nightmare for Europe. We already seen during the pandemic in summer big delays, and that's traffic which was way below the summer of 2019. So here we have either single European sky, how do we digitalize the management, how do we improve the management of the air, taxiing of airports or final approach and things. So there are quite a few areas operationally, again, not just on airports and airlines, but in the ecosystem that we need to move forward and implement urgently if we are going to be helping the restart or restarting the whole industry.
Thierry, we are on negative, but a final word.
Yeah, I'll try to be quick. I think, collaboration is absolutely the key for success, because airport is about planning. Our industry is it's funny. We have the short time. Airlines are focused and very adapted and fast to react, and we have the long time. And airports is about infrastructure that are here and that have to be planned with anticipation. We need to meet both long time and short time, basically. And we have to be in a situation of trust and transparency for us together to understand the needs, to plan for those needs, and to have the other stakeholders step in this work, because they have a role to play. ANSPs, air navigation service providers, they have a crucial role to play. European single sky and everything, this is a key issue for all of us. We have to sit around the table, define a roadmap, share objectives, define KPIs, and an action plan to get there. Very openly, very transparently, and I think this is the only way for success. So we are available for that.
Good. Thierry, Rafael, thank you so much. I think there were three words that we used a lot, which kind of resonate with the notion or the analogy of the house, which was trust, sharing, and transparency, right? So in many ways, I think that resonates quite well. So thank you for being here, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.